Good morning. Happy International Women's Day. It's the 8th of March. And today is the day when across the world we celebrate women. And I wanted to make this video because the 8th of March is also the day that my mum would have turned 91 years old. Sadly, I lost my mum when I was 22. She was 54. Never get it quite right. She was 54. And I wanted to make this video as basically a tribute to her, but also to recognise all of the amazing women out there in the world. I think times are changing, and I think the very fact that we have an International Women's Day that celebrates the many achievements of women is a great thing. But the fact that we're still having to have a day that has the theme on International Women's Day of for all women and girls, rights, equality, empowerment. In 2025, this doesn't seem right. That should already be in place, but I'm a realist and I don't think we're going to see parity for many years to come. However, that's not the point of this video. The point of this one really is a bit more personal. It's for me to share a little bit about my mum, because this day is always poignant. The 8th of March, you know, I've worked in the arena of raising equality for women, or recognising the differences that women, the unique differences that women bring to the workforce around sort of menopause and things. So I've done lots of work in the past on the 8th of March, celebrating International Women's Day, where I was brought in to speak or to teach about the impact of menopause on women. And it's always felt like a very poignant day. So this video really is just about me being able to share with you a little bit about one of the women in my life who has really inspired me, despite the fact that I lost her when I was just 22 years old. Now, I'm going to caveat this with a pre-warning that I do wear my emotions quite close to the surface, so there may be a few tears as we go, but I'm going to do my best to control myself. So let me tell you a little bit about the woman who I'm celebrating today. My mum, or as she was when she was alive, me mum, because we were brought up in Newcastle and my mum was a Geordie through and through. She was one of three, the eldest of three sisters, although in reality there were four sisters. She was a twin, but her twin sister died when they were very young, and I believe it was from gastroenteritis. And my mum, from what I've heard from stories from the family, was the weaker of the two twins. In those days, she was born in 1934. She was born at home, and when the twins were born, her sister Margaret, her twin sister Margaret, was the sturdier, the more robust of the two twins. And I think from what I've heard from family stories, that mum was kind of set aside almost and disregarded, and the focus was put on Margaret to because obviously, you know, infant mortality was probably quite high then. So they put the focus on the stronger of the two babies. And from what I understand, my mum's aunt took her and basically looked after her while the midwife sorted out Margaret and did all of the things that she needed to do. My great auntie Irene took my mum and wrapped her up and made sure she was warm and basically nurtured her, and she survived. And she grew up as a Catholic, which we didn't, but she grew up as a Catholic, was brought up in a Catholic nuns' school. And she met my dad, I think, when they were very young. I think she was married at 21 or 22. She was very young. I'm sure my brother will tell me all of the dates that I've got wrong. He's a bit older than me, so he knows these things better than I do. But she had a hard life. We were brought up in quite a deprived area of the northeast, and although my dad was one of the fortunate ones who was always in work, money was tight, but I don't ever remember not having things. We probably didn't have the big overseas holidays. In fact, I know my mum had never been abroad until she was in her late 40s, early 50s, and she went on a trip with her sister to Germany to see my cousin, and that was her only experience of going abroad. But they did have quite a tough life financially. Things were tight, but they were married, you know, up until she died. They were married a long time, and as I say, I don't recall ever really going without anything. We didn't have the best of everything by any means, but if there was something we wanted, my mum would do everything possible to try and make sure we had it without being spoiled. You know, we weren't lavished with things. They didn't go into debt to buy us things, but I just don't ever remember really wanting for anything. Sadly, when I was 15, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, I don't know what kind of breast cancer it was. I do know that she had a mastectomy and a breast taken off, and then she was subjected to some fairly brutal radiotherapy. And of course, we're going back, 1980. Let me have a think. She died in 1988, so it would have been about 1981. And treatment was nowhere near as targeted or focused as it is now. And I just remember her going for radiotherapy and coming home from the hospital, and she was just wiped out. It was like she had the most severe sunburn, and it was challenging. We had my grandmother living with us at the time, and she was quite challenging in her own right. And I remember also going to my cousin's wedding. My mum was going through the treatment, and it was up in Inverness. We travelled up to Scotland, and mum was, you know, drugged up to the eyeballs, bless her, and really poorly, but she still struggled on and made it to the wedding, and she looked beautiful. But what was really interesting was once she'd recovered from the treatment, she never had reconstructive surgery. I don't know if she was ever offered it. I do remember going with her to buy prosthetic bras so that she could, you know, feel comfortable with her prosthetic. But I don't ever remember her being offered any kind of reconstructive surgery. I don't know if maybe that wasn't a thing then. You can tell I'm a bit low on facts, but of course, unfortunately, she died when I was quite young, and one of my biggest regrets in life is that I didn't spend more time talking to her, you know, really talking to her. But I think as a teenager, I just didn't. You know, I was probably quite a challenging teenager, if I'm honest, and possibly a bit rebellious, maybe. I don't know whether the stress of everything that was going on made me a bit rebellious, but I didn't ask her all of the things I wanted to ask her. But she was such a smart woman. She was pretty well educated, you know. She had a good schooling, but I don't think it was the done thing in those days for women from the northeast to really be ambitious or to go to university or anything like that. But I just remember she was so smart. She would You know when you get a crossword puzzle and you've got the easy and the cryptic, she'd fly through the cryptic in minutes. She was like Inspector Morse flying through those cryptic crosswords. And I could never work out how the heck she could do it. She had a brilliant grasp of English. English was really her strongest subject. She loved reading and she read prolifically. But she was also, she had a couple of jobs that I just remember thinking, oh God, I couldn't do that. At one point she worked in a small independent bookies betting shop. And I used to go in there because it wasn't far from my school. So at lunchtimes I'd sometimes pop down and have lunch with her. And it was a nice community bookies. Actually, I've never been in a booking office in my life. I've never been in a bookies in my life to place a bet. But just as a teenager going in and seeing her working, she had this beautiful rapport with the clients, the customers that came in. But she was such a lady. She never swore. She was always such a lady. Probably a bit of a contradiction, really. My mum at a betting office, they were like so what's the word, incongruent. But she just had this lovely manner and this banter with the guys that came in to place their bets. But what used to fascinate me was how she could tot up the bets, and she just could work out all of accumulators and things like that. She could just work it out in her head. Like, God, I can't do that. I mean, my English is pretty good, but my maths not so good. So she worked there for a little while. And then another job she had was working in a curtain and blind making shop. And again, people would come in with their kind of measurements of their window sizes, and she'd be able to, in her head, almost without sort of writing anything down, figure out exactly how much they needed, curtain material they needed. She'd be able to kind of calculate the inside of their window and how much excess they'd need if they wanted the blind on the outside. It was just absolutely amazing to watch her. She was so smart. And unfortunately, I don't think she ever really recognised that she was. And I don't think she was ever really told that she was. It just didn't happen in those days. But I know if she'd had the right environment, she'd have flown. She was such a clever woman. Sadly lacked confidence. I don't think she had the confidence to realise how smart she was. When she'd had the radiotherapy and the mastectomy, and she was kind of given the all clear from the breast cancer, it was like she took on a new lease of life. She'd always been very shy, very quiet, very reserved, but she started doing things for herself that she'd never kind of taken up before. For example, she volunteered to teach ex-prisoners who had literacy problems, who couldn't read. She signed up to do adult literacy classes with them, and she'd have probably 3 or 4 ex-convicts who she was working with to help them read and write. And she just had this lovely sort of rapport with these guys, and it was getting so, she got so much joy out of helping them, and seeing them kind of find their way as well, I guess, through helping them to build their confidence around their literacy. She also joined the Women's Institute with a friend, which wasn't really her thing. If I remember rightly, before the cancer, she wasn't really into all of that sort of thing. But she joined the Women's Institute, and they did like a revue, a stage show. I remember my mum getting dressed up as like a little schoolboy, with a little school cap and a blazer and little shorts and little white socks, and a little catapult. And she went on stage and did this little skit as part of a review I cut with the Women's Institute. And on her own, like this solo performance, which was just so not her before she had the cancer. And it was like she was all in, you know, it was like, no, life's too short, I'm all in here. And both her and my dad loved ballroom and Latin dancing. I think that's where I get my love of that from. And they started doing more things together. They did more ballroom and Latin dancing. They also started playing green bowls, you know, bowls like carpet bowls, but outside. Is it green? Green bowls? I don't know what they call it. And they built a really lovely community there. And she'd always knitted. She was a prolific knitter, and she would make the most complex knitting patterns, you know, knit from really complex knitting patterns. And this is why I'm fairly certain she had ADHD as well, because she could be knitting, reading a book, watching what was on TV, and listening to conversations. It was just the most incredible thing to watch. She was like the queen of multitasking. She could just do all of these things at the same time. And the other reason I think she had ADHD was, oh my God, she was so distractible and very untidy, but so distractible. And you'd have a conversation with her, and there'd be like 4 different conversations in one sentence. So you'd have to go, whoa, hang on a minute, I can't stop. I need to pick out what it is you've just said. She was just, her brain just worked so fast. Sadly, the cancer did come back. I was living in the Outer Hebrides, so I was 21 at the time, and I was living in the Outer Hebrides, and we just had, we didn't have a telephone in the house. We had a red phone box at the end of our street, and every week, once a week, I'd go and call Mum, and we'd have a chat on the phone. I've got a picture actually in our dining room now that I picked up just a few years ago when I went back to visit the Outer Hebrides, and it's a sheep and a croft and the red telephone box, and I had to buy it because it just reminded me so much of that time when I was sort of walking up to the phone box to call my mum. And we were due to come back from the Outer Hebrides in late 1997, November 1997. And the last few phone calls we had with my mum, I knew there was something going on. She didn't tell me, but I could just sense something was happening. And I guess she didn't want to tell me what was going on because I was so far away, and you know, we didn't have FaceTime or WhatsApp or anything like that in those days, and I think she didn't want to worry me. But when we got back home in November 1988, I kind of knew there was something not right, and we didn't go back to Newcastle, we moved down to Lincolnshire, and Mum and Dad came to visit in the January 1988, and that's when she told us that she'd been having some other health issues, and they thought the cancer had come back, but not in the breast. Anyway, roll on a couple of months, and I think it was about the March, April time, she was formally diagnosed as having secondary bone cancer, and that it was terminal. And we didn't know how long we were going to have her for. And my brother was getting married on the 1st of October 1988, and my mum was so keen to make it to the wedding. Unfortunately, she had a fall and fractured her hip, and had to have a hip replacement in around about the April time. And then when she went into the hospital to have something done, I can't remember exactly what, she had another fall, and it fractured her spine, and it meant that she was paralysed from the waist up. Sorry, from the waist down, I beg your pardon. From the chest down. So she spent her last few months basically bedbound, and a lot of it in the latter stages, very much sort of medicated with diamorphine. And unfortunately, she didn't make my brother's wedding. She passed away on the 22nd of September. So she tried her best to get there. She was adamant she wanted to see my brother wed. And it didn't happen, which is a shame, and it must have been devastating for him. And he did go ahead with the wedding because that's what Mum would have wanted, and it was the right thing to do. But it must have been very hard for him and my sister-in-law, knowing that their lovely wedding day was overshadowed with that. It was interesting as well because my mum's youngest sister, who'd been told for many years she wouldn't be able to have children, actually gave birth that week. So Mum died, my nephew was born, and my brother got married all within a week. We literally took up the hatches, matches and dispatches in 1 week alone in our family. So yes, I have very fond memories of my mum. There are some things that make me very sad. None of our grandchildren got to meet their grandma. My mum died in 88 and my daughter was born in 1990, and she's the first of the grandchildren. She'd have had 4 grandchildren and she didn't get to meet any of them, and they didn't get to meet her either, which is incredibly sad because I know they'd have loved her and she'd have loved them. But yes, there we go. That's my mum. And I would love to know in the comments who's been the woman in your life who's inspired you. Who would you nominate as your hero? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know your stories. Who, and maybe if you want a little bit about why they're your hero. So I'm going to leave it there and wish everybody a happy International Women's Day. And I'll talk to you again soon. Take care.